So how do I find the slope and y-intercept when given a verbal statement asking me to write a function? Okay, so I'm going to show you an easy way to do it. And as I tell many of you, I have a reading disability, so I have an issue when I read text, especially when the text is very long. So I follow this process that you see up here at the top, and it makes it very easy for me to identify what's the slope and what's the y-intercept. And you do have problems like this that pop up on your star from time to time. For instance, I'm going to box variables, numbers, and I'm going to label the slope M and the y-intercept B. Now, one more thing that I didn't put on here is we are also going to underline keywords. So I'm going to put underline. And you might be asking, well, you know what are keywords? Well, I'm going to tell you what the keywords are. For instance, we have two types of keywords. Some of them refer to the slope. So I'm going to put an M right here. And the keywords for the slope are going to be these right here. Each, every, and, a, and per. When you see these words, each, every, and, a, and per, the majority of the time, it is going to identify that number as the slope. Now, I should have put keywords up here. The next thing that I want you to know is that when we talk about our B, our y-intercept, there's keywords that often come up for that too. Now, sometimes you'll see each appear for both of them. And if that's the case, you have to look at which one happens more often. So which change happens more often, because that would be the slope. But I would say the majority of the time, they make it very easy to find the y-intercept because they like to use words like this: plus, initial, or one time. So those are just common words that identify the y-intercept. So I'm going to be looking for these keywords for the slope and these keywords for the y-intercept, so that way I can identify which number is which. So let's read this problem. Mr. H can solve 34 math problems per hour. So I found one of those words. In this case, it was per. And he has already solved 20 problems. Now it says already solved 20. Now, even though I didn't have already here, and you can see this is one of those situations where it's not exactly the same, but that means it's the initial amount of problems I already have done. Initial just means like what I'm starting with. So because of that, I know that this has to be my y-intercept. So I'm going to put a B on top of it. And then I know this one, it had the word per, and so that's going to be my slope. Now it's asking me on here, it says it wants me to go ahead and write an equation, right, that we can use. So notice it says write a function which can be used to find how many problems he can solve in X hours when f of X is equal to the total number of problems he has solved. Okay, so what we're going to do is they don't want us to use y equals. In other words, they don't want us to write it like y equals mx plus b. They want us to write it as a function. And the function f of x represents y. So this is f of x is equal to, and my slope is 34. So for my m, I'm going to go ahead and put a 34 in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and put an x, and then plus the b. And the b is 20. We already had 20 problems done. So plus 20. So instead of writing this as y equals 34x plus 20, we're just putting it in function notation. And we're saying f of x is equal to 34x plus 20. So it's pretty much the same thing. You're just replacing the y with f of x. And it told us what letters to use, right? X for hour, and f of x represents the total number of problems that we've solved, right? Our answer over here on the left. Notice on this next problem, once again, it says, how do I find the slope and y-intercept when given a verbal statement asking me to write a function? Again, it is asking me to write a function. So instead of y equals mx plus b, I'm going to write it as f of x equals mx plus b. And it may not be f of x, right? It'll have instructions. It'll tell you what to use for y, and it'll tell you what to use for the variable x. And if so, just be prepared. It doesn't always have to be f of x. It could be g of x. It could be t of m. There's a lot of different things that it could be. But we're going to write it in function notation. So this says Mr. H is performing an oil change on his Ford Mustang, And the oil drains, I'm going to underline that, at a rate of 2 quarts a minute. So I already know, because it used the word a, and remember each, every, and a, that indicates this is likely going to be the slope. But let me read the next sentence just to make sure that there's not something that happens more often than the oil draining at 2 quarts a minute. It says the vehicle's crankcase has a capacity of 8 quarts of motor oil. Okay, now even if you don't know what a crankcase is on an engine, the fact is it says it has a capacity of 8 quarts. So I know that this is the initial value. So I can say with confidence right now, this 2 is going to represent my M. It's what's going to be changing more often. The 8 is how much oil the car holds. So I'm going to label this down here as B. Now let's see what else it says. It says write a function using M for the minutes. I'm going to box that. That represents minutes, representing the situation, which can be used to determine f of m. So instead of f of x, we're using an f of m. The amount of the oil in the crankcase at any given time while draining. Okay, just remember that, and I'm going to just draw a note here. The m is replacing the variable x in our equation. So I'm going to circle it. And the f of m is replacing the variable y in our equation. So, right, instead of a y, we're going to have f of m. Instead of an x, right, we see right here, we're going to have an m in its place. But I've got everything noted, and we're ready to go ahead and write it. So let's take a look at how we would do this. Now, I do want to mention one thing. There is a key word in here that I seen, and when it says drains. So I want you to ask yourself, if oil is draining out of the car, are we taking away oil or are we adding oil? It's very important to think about it. And so, because that makes a difference between whether our slope is positive or negative. And in this case, if something is draining out over time, we're going to have less of it. So drain means that we are subtracting 2 quarts every minute. So I'm going to put a negative sign in front of the m to remind myself my slope has to be negative. So if I'm writing this right, in the case of I'm trying to write it and make it look like y equals mx plus b, but I'm now going to replace the y with f of m. So f of m. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my slope in there. Now my slope is not positive because I'm taking away oil from the engine over time. So it's going to be minus. Drains means we're subtracting. So the m is going to be minus 2. And then I'm going to put my x after it. And then b is my y-intercept. It's how much oil we had when we started. And that's going to be a positive number because we started with 8 quarts. So plus 8. Now I did mess up here. Notice I put an x here because I have the habit of putting an x. But remember the x has to be replaced with an m. So let's turn that x into an m. So our final answer would be f of m is equal to negative 2m plus 8. If it gave you a multiple choice option, this is exactly how it'd be written. We'd have to replace that x with an m.